Welcome to this office hours conversation on career myths and facts for graduating students. I'm Danny Nolan, a junior here at Duke University, and today I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our man, Bill Wright-Swadel. He is the Fannie Mitchell Executive Director of the Duke Career Center. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Danny.
So, Bill, let's get it started straight up. What are the myths and facts?
I think the way to start is really with the myths. And I think at a liberal arts institution, the biggest myth is that you have to know what you want to do and what you want to retire from in order to plan your academic career at a university. And so students come to us very often with the impression that the kind of planning that they did in high school, what are the 10 things I need to do to get to a great university like Duke? Well, unfortunately, that advice worked. Everybody here followed the advice, and they're here. So now they come and they want to know, what are the 10 steps to a career in? What are the 10 things I have to do to get a fellowship or go to graduate school? And frankly, the world doesn't work that way at all. And so that's probably the biggest myth, Danny.
So, Bill, graduation is about a month away.
Yep.
In a hypothetical situation for you real quick, let's say you get a call from a concerned parent and they say, oh, well, my son or daughter, they don't have a job yet. And they're worried that they may have wasted their time and resources on a college education. What would you say in response to a phone call like that?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure it's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
Okay? But you know, when you get that kind of a concern, and parents are concerned, obviously, and should be, what is important to know is that not all students and not all career fields operate on the same schedule. And so, for example, a student who's been embedded in a senior thesis, or a student who's been engaged in activities of one kind or another, that may be sport or it may be academic or research of one kind, often their launch begins at a different time. Or if you're in an industry like advertising and PR, in many cases, or public service, the jobs aren't hired 9 months ahead of time. They're hired just in time. And so it's not unusual for a student to be at this time of the year looking for a job and getting one fairly quickly, okay? But it's not time to panic. It's time to plan, it's time to execute, and it's time to be really confident that you've done the right things and go tell people about them.
Now, you mentioned it's not uncommon to have a phone call like that happen, perhaps not a hypothetical situation, but is it common to have a lot of students that don't have a job at this point in time?
I think, yeah, when we do our senior survey research at this time of the year, pretty close to 10 or 15% of the class will tell us that they don't know what their plans are for September. I think depending on the market, that ranges from 10 or 15 up to 20, 25% of the class at this time doesn't know. And unfortunately, most of the students hear about all the students who made their decisions back in October or November, and there's an anxiety. Duke students are nothing if not competitive.
Right.
And so as one student gets an offer, the student begins to feel behind. When two students in the suite get an offer, the student who hasn't now really feels behind. And often they're just beginning their sequence, and that's okay.
Right. So let's talk about the job market. How is it right now? And are graduates this year going into perhaps a better economic climate than those in years past?
Yeah, I think whenever you talk about the job market, the first thing you have to do is understand that it's segmented. Okay, and so rarely does the whole market, I mean, in 2008, we went through a period when the whole market was hurt almost concurrently. Okay, but that's a relatively unusual phenomenon, and so returning and coming back from that is also not everybody comes back at the same time. But certainly the marketplace this year is better than it was last year. We see more activity, we see more employers coming, we see more jobs on our job boards or more internships, okay? Not only for the undergraduates, but also for graduate students as well.
So we talked to a few students about how they were preparing for the job market, and I'm interested to see what you think as far as a reaction goes. Can we roll that clip real quick?
Looking for stuff for the summer, looking for stuff that would get me experience.
Taking advantage of as many opportunities on campus as possible to put some stuff on my resume, but also making sure that I'm interested in that as well.
Hope to do study abroad one semester, maybe Duke Engage, just get involved in things that interest me.
It's just a lot of networking and getting to know the professors and toning up your personal qualities and characteristics and knowing what you want in the future.
Not much, to be honest.
So, Bill, obviously a wide array of responses there from students, whether it be resume building, internships, networking, the proverbial not much. Yeah. What do you see when you look at these responses from students as far as to how they're preparing for the job market right now?
Yeah, I think, first of all, the danger that you see in the response is the reactiveness. Okay, I'm doing what other people expect me to do or want me to do in order to be successful. And the reality is students who come to a place like Duke are really pretty remarkably talented women and men. We choose them because they are diversely able, and we choose them because they're diversely interested. And a part of what's really going to build success across the 4 years a student is at Duke is really understanding, as one of the students mentioned, reality testing experiences, understanding what you enjoy and like, and building your network. And I for me, building a network always gets to the notion of building a board of advisors.
Well, on top of that, you meet regularly with students, but you also meet with potential employers.
Sure.
And we have a list of your, what of the abilities that you're looking for, as far as what employers are looking for from students. Can you take us through this list and kind of explain how students might demonstrate these skills to potential employers?
Yeah, I think verbal communication, one of the first things that you obviously are looking for, and the employers are, is a student's ability to participate and command a conversation, okay? And participation and command are different things. But being able to engage in the conversation, demonstrate not only the ability to speak, but the ability to listen, to acquire knowledge, and then to repackage what's been said often using their own knowledge or creativity to further the goals of the team, because almost everything is team-oriented.
So, and is there anything else on that list that specifically you look at? It's 6 or 7 points here.
Yeah.
What would you say maybe would be the most important of those as far as what employers are expecting from students?
It changes depending on the employer that a student is talking to a degree.
Okay.
But I think if you looked at that list as a whole, what you really saw is the notion that academic strength or domain of knowledge is still important. It's still the core. It's where somebody demonstrates their ability to take in and process lots of information. But problem solving, articulation of a problem, the ability to work in a team, particularly a diverse team. Most of the evidence says the more diverse a work team is, the more creative the solutions they will create. And so students being able to do that. So what we look at is really T-shaped employees, people who have a great core of knowledge, who then have what some people in engineering call the soft skills, the team, the cross-cultural communication, the listening, the ability to articulate a problem and solve it, and then the quantitative skills. Can I process data? Can I do an analysis of data? Can I start with lots and boil it down? Or can I start with a hypothesis and either prove or disprove it? And if you're doing that, I think you've created a great plan. The nice thing is you can do that as easily from a major in English Lit or philosophy as you can do that from a major in sociology or psychology or markets and management or engineering. Okay, and our students, because they are diversely able, can use their domain of knowledge to package what employers are looking for quite easily.
Gotcha. Well, we have a few questions today. Obviously, this is a topic that a lot of people are interested in at this point in time. And the first question comes from Jake. He asks, how can we encourage more Duke students to go off track and pursue risky ventures or startup opportunities? Yeah,
I think that risk behavior is really often cultural. And so at a place like Duke, you see the university making intentional decisions about innovation, entrepreneurship, social enterprise, engaging internationally. All behaviors that say what's happening in the world, how is it happening, and what's really going on, and we need to be at the front of that. And so if students are watching and listening to their faculty, to their administration, to their peers, but most particularly to their alumni, the fact of the matter is our alumni are really quite risk engaged. Our students tend to want to launch well, so they tend to be more risk averse. But I think very quickly when they get into the marketplace, Duke students are much less risk averse than we think of them at start.
And when they first get started, do you see perhaps a shift or a change in your 4.5 years here at Duke thus far? Have there been more risks taken in recent years versus in the past, just because of the change in the economic climate in America right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think as employers have shifted, for example, away from aggressively going to large numbers of schools. Okay, Duke is fortunate in that we tend to be a target for many employers, but even here, the numbers of employers who are targeting schools to take lots of graduates is shrinking. Again, if we go back to the notion of diverse teams, the more people you take from one institution, the more they tend to think and look alike. Okay, so organizations understand that. So what you see as a pattern at institutions is fewer companies coming to take 20 graduates, 25 graduates, more companies coming to take 5 graduates, 4 graduates. Okay, so there's a lot more networking, both on our part as a career center and on the part of individual students themselves.
Gotcha. Well, we have another question here. This one's via email from Sean. He asks, how do you see self and social awareness of identity, for example, race, gender, sexuality, etc., relating to a student's preparation for the workforce? And in addition, is it necessary to take opportunities to explore this in college?
Yeah, I'll take the second part of that, because I think that that's the really the way we need to think about it. And that is, those factors, social factors, personal factors, experience that you have growing up in a family, all color both the imagination and the exposure that one has. Okay? And so as you are exposed to different career fields, or as you are exposed to choices, the possibility that you will imagine yourself in them goes up. So if a student comes here, and one of the things that we talk about all the time at the Career Center, and I think this relates right to the point, many people, many of the experts we talk to believe that our students are going, less than half of the things that our students are going to work at have been invented yet. Okay? So understanding what the market is, but also learning how to adapt is incredibly important. So for students where identity is really important, understanding what is an expectation from your family, understanding what's an expectation from your community, and then understanding how you fit or don't fit those expectations, and recognizing that in this community, you can explore anything and accomplish everything.
That's a very good message that I'm very happy to hear at this point. A topic that's been in the news a lot has been the topic of student loan debt, and it's a big concern for a lot of people. Sure. How does that affect that first job out of college as far as what you're looking for?
Yeah, I think it's a real concern. And one of the things that we worry about a lot is when does debt actually begin to influence a student's set of choices? So if a student is going to what they perceive to be a lucrative career because they don't believe they have a choice, whether that's coming out of undergraduate or coming out of a master's or PhD program, that's the kind of crunch point, okay? And so I think as we work with students, we're always engaged in the process of helping them understand what is the intersection of reality and imagination, and how do you launch well and continue your development, and if you have to do things that are financially perhaps more relevant for the short term, what are you doing to move towards the independence you need in the longer term? Okay, almost everything in the career business is now process and sequence. Very little of it is point in time, because change, adaptation, and movement is much more a typical pattern than I was hired by a company and they're going to raise me to be CEO. Okay?
Right.
Rarely happens.
So when you're seeing students, this obviously affects their decision making, and you try to encourage them not to think so much about the short term versus the long term. But is that actually the case for a lot of students? Are they thinking just about getting that first big job to pay off their debts? Or is it the case where a lot of people have taken into consideration the long-term effects of their job decisions?
Well, I think it's both, Danny. I mean, the reality is that some students are risk takers and some are more risk averse, as we talked about a minute ago.
Right.
And so the reality is that for some students, they know that where their success is and where the financial rewards are don't start big at the beginning. Entrepreneurship is a great example of that. Okay? But it also has a very high top side if it works. And so figuring out what your risk tolerance is and figuring out what your financial reality is. It's like a student saying, I'm going to go and teach, but I'm going to go and teach in New York City, or I'm going to go and teach in North Carolina. The salaries have to be really, really different in order to live the same lifestyle. Okay, so for example, North Carolina, everybody thinks all Duke students leave. And the fact of the matter is North Carolina is the second preferred destination after New York City, okay, for Duke students' first job.
That's very interesting. I had no idea that was the case. Now, let's shift this to networking.
Yep.
And a hot topic, especially in this generation, is online networking versus in-person networking.
Sure.
Now, this does not mean you have to choose an either or. You don't have to pick one is better than the other. But let's say you have one individual, they're using their LinkedIn account all of the time. And then another one is a big proponent of just doing in-person network, any kind of situation like that at the individual place. Is one better than the other? Is there a preference? And what would you recommend as far as how students pursue networking right now?
Well, the first thing I would say is that most of the research tells us that employers, for example, SHRM data tells us that upwards of 70% of employers now use your online presence as part of a decision making. Okay? And they look, not because you told them to go there, or that's where you're networking, but because you're there, therefore they're there. Okay? So whether it's LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever domain you're in, you have to manage your online presence. Okay? Then how you use it is often based on your strengths. Some students come across extraordinarily well in person. Others are very glib on the telephone. Some are much more comfortable initiating a conversation, okay, online. I don't worry so much about how one initiates. I worry about a student making sure they develop the range of behaviors necessary to be successful. We do lots of interviews online now. Okay, or over this kind of a conversation, okay, whether that's a networking conversation or a real interview. But the fact of the matter is at some point we're going to sit down together and you have to be who you were online in life. And students have to understand both.
Now, when you talk about responsibility over any kind of social networking, you mentioned LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter is another popular mode of, there's Foursquare, there's so many social media websites out there right now. Responsibility, do people come off poorly a lot of the time by looking at these social sites versus just an in-person conversation, a resume, or networking that we mentioned earlier?
Well, I think if students aren't really looking, I mean, if we have a whole set of advice on the Career Center website about managing your brand, okay, and managing your web presence and your online presence, and so certainly students can come across badly if they are not looking as an employer would to see what they find. The notion that there's a separate environment where only students go, the privacy settings only work so far. And you have to remember, many of you become interns and you go to work for employers. And you have friends at other schools who will show people your website or will show people your online presence. Okay, because that's what they're being asked to do.
Gotcha. Well, from there, what technology would you recommend people using, maybe aside from the sites that we've mentioned already?
Oh, I think the ones we mentioned are really the core, the core environments, and I certainly think LinkedIn is the one that we see that the alumni are using the most. And so if you're really looking to say, where am I going to do my networking and where am I going to meet alumni who are not only interested in hiring me, but interested in giving me advice, who are potential collaborators when I'm a first year in thinking about how I plan my time or how I use my summers. I think LinkedIn is a great source. Now, obviously, right now, Duke Connect is also a platform that the Alumni Association runs, and there are alumni there who have already volunteered to talk with both students and other Duke alumni, and so that's a site where a student can go and, frankly, mine the site for resources. But LinkedIn is fast surpassing most environments as the go-to career site.
Now, as the executive director, the Fannie Mitchell executive director, I should say, of the Duke Career Center, you obviously know a lot about Duke Connect. Can you tell us a little bit more about that site and how it really benefits students right now?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that, first of all, everybody on it has chosen to be on it. Okay, so some students hate the rejection of reaching out to somebody and not being responded to. And pretty much, unless the person has forgotten that they're in there, which happens on occasion, okay, the reality is most of the people will respond to a student because that's what they agreed to do. And I think for a student, going to Duke Connect provides them an opportunity to ask a range of questions that are not anxiety producing because the alum understands. So you can say, look, I failed somewhere. How do I talk about that? How do I tell somebody, because I can't hide it? How do I tell somebody about that? And the alum will really talk about it either from a perspective of what they experienced in their own life, because we all have failed, or they will come up with a friend or another alum who has experience in that experience and will share it.
Well, from there, you've actually mentioned a secret weapon for people looking for jobs right now is a reference librarian. That's interesting. Can you elaborate a little bit onto why this is a secret weapon for those looking for jobs?
Well, it's not a secret to people in the career business, but it certainly is a secret to students. Okay, and if you really think about a job search, very often a job search is identifying the solution to a problem. Okay, and if you and I were to sit down and design a question, okay, if I want to be in broadcast journalism in the sports domain a year from now, okay, but I want to do it outside of the United States, okay, what are the resources available to me and how do I solve that? Frankly, I can think of nobody who would have more fun answering that question than most of the reference librarians I know, because that's what they do. They solve those kinds of problems all the time, and they know not only the paper resources, but the electronic resources. They know the community extraordinarily well. They work with faculty, administrators. So, and often they know young alumni who have moved on, who they helped in that same question before. So learning how to do research is the primary thing one gets from the library, but learning not only how to do the research, but how to imagine the question, because they reframe questions beautifully. And I think our students miss them as a great career resource.
And we've already brought it back to Duke a little bit here. I have some numbers in front of me that you're probably familiar with already. And this is in regards to what last year's seniors were planning to do after graduation. About half get a job right away, a quarter go on to grad school, and 10% weren't sure, which we discussed a little bit earlier. Yeah. So are there any trends here in what students are doing after college overall?
Yeah, I think one of the first trends is really the notion of a gap year. And by a gap year, we don't mean a student, going to the beach and relaxing for a year. What we're talking about is a student who has a purpose in mind. I am going to medical school. I want to launch my career on Wall Street. I want to start my own business. I want to get a PhD, whatever it is. But there are some things that I haven't finished, or some things I haven't experienced that I want to do that I'm likely to not do if I launch fully into graduate school or fully into whatever. So I'm going to step back and I'm going to reality test a new field. I'm going to express something I want to do, I'm going to write, I'm going to travel, and I'm going to do it purposefully. Or very often we work with students who say, look, I've got 3 or 4 things I think I may want to do. Do I get a full-time job in them? Well, contract work is a big trend right now, and helping students to imagine doing 3 or 4 3 to 5 month experiences rather than launching into a full career training program, let's say, is something we do fairly regularly with students. So the gap year is probably the biggest difference. The second is the notion that you're not making a decision for a long time. It's what are you going to do next? You know, and parents and media right now spend a lot of time worrying about, for example, what percentage of students are doing public service. I worry less about what percentage are doing public service at the beginning. What I think a place like Duke does extraordinarily well is help students understand that public service is a lifetime kind of commitment, and you may do that as part of your job. You may do that as a philanthropist. You may do that by being on a board or actually building houses with Habitat. It doesn't matter, but it's finding that niche and what fits you. So for me, it may be a career. So the number one employer at Duke, who is it? Teach for America. They hire more students at graduation than any other employer we've had. Okay. Wow. Now, that's a 2-year commitment. Okay. It's a paid professional responsibility, and it's serious work. It's important work. But it's not what most of the students are going to retire from or even do next. It's their transition, much like the Peace Corps has been.
So we talked earlier, you referenced that it's not only undergraduates that are getting jobs from Duke right now, it's also graduate students with PhDs. How is the process different for those who are, 3 to 4 minimum years older than some of the students that are in undergraduate and their job market and their the availability of jobs, I should say?
Yeah, I think the market for PhDs has gotten hammered in terms of the media, and frankly, it's a very tough market because many of the students come in with an expectation of a linear progression. I'm going to get a full-time tenure track position at a Research One university. Well, the market is not such that everyone is going to do that. But frankly, that hasn't been the reality for 10 years. If you look at the data from the graduate school over 10 years, our students have gone into full-time academic tenure track jobs. They go into non-tenure track positions, which is a training ground and a transitional opportunity for many. Postdocs have grown dramatically. If you're in the sciences, pretty close to a quarter of the people who come out go into a postdoc first. Okay, and that's growing in other fields. Okay, but in sciences and engineering, a third of the students that come out often go into the private and public sector, not in the academy at all. And if you look nationally, that's a trend. And so what is the biggest difference, Danny, is really time. If we're talking about planning your exit strategy over 5 years as opposed to 3 or 4 or 7 years, okay, it's a different process. And what is the same is we want students to begin at the beginning and to build their process. I referenced the notion Board of Advisors a little earlier, and I hope we get to come back to that at some point.
Well, we have about a minute or 2 left in the show. If you want to quickly talk about the Board of Advisors, please feel free.
I would love to, because the issue that's really critical to me is many people talk about having a mentor. And if you look at Duke students are very different in different environments. The people know you here in the broadcast studio as one young man. Your professors know you quite differently. Somebody that's maybe in the public service that you do knows you again a different way. And if you're seeking advice from only one person, you're getting advice based on only a piece of who you are. You're a very complex young man, as all Duke students are. A board of advisors gives you the range to have advice from supervisors, parents, faculty members, some peers, alumni, but people who know the range of who you are. And the second thing it does is it puts you in charge, because the chairman of the board is always the student. And it's his or her responsibility to figure out how to solve the dilemma of different advice.
Well, Bill Wright-Swadel, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great conversation. And speaking of the conversation, a recording of it will be available on the Duke Today website. That's today.duke.edu.
Produced by Duke University, online at duke.edu.